We live in a world that's always telling us to share everything. Be open, be vulnerable, put it all out there. But what if real power, and honestly, real peace, comes from the things we choose not to say? Today, we're going to flip that script and decode the psychology of strategic silence. We're going to uncover 8 things that maybe you should just keep to yourself. So let's start with why that cringy feeling of oversharing, why it runs so deep. Ugh, you know that feeling, right? That knot in your stomach, that little voice in your head going, ugh, why did I say that? It's that feeling of being just a little too exposed. And believe me, we've all been there. But here's what's so fascinating. This isn't just you being awkward or making a social mistake. No, it goes way deeper than that. Psychologists tell us that this feeling, it's actually a hardwired biological response. So what's really going on? Well, at its core, when you overshare, your brain feels like you've lost control of your own story. And our brains are wired to see any loss of control as a threat. And that's a primary trigger for anxiety. So keeping things private isn't about being shady. It's about protecting your own peace of mind. All right, let's kick things off with something we all have. Our biggest goals, our dreams. We're always told to share them, right? But this is where we find our very first trap. We've all heard this advice a million times. Post it online, tell all your friends, manifest your destiny by shouting it from the rooftops. It sounds so motivating, but the psychological reality? It's the complete opposite. Okay, and this is where the science gets really, really interesting. When you announce a big goal, your brain gives you a little hit of dopamine. That's the same reward chemical you'd get if you actually achieved the thing. This creates something called the intention-behavior gap. Basically, your brain feels a sense of accomplishment, which then completely saps your motivation to do the actual hard work. You get the prize before you've even run the race. And this just lays it out so perfectly. On one side, you have the fantasy of sharing. You get that quick dopamine hit, you get social validation, it feels like success. But on the other side, by staying quiet, you protect what really matters, your momentum, your internal drive. That's what actually leads to success. The most successful people, they often build in silence. So this idea doesn't just apply to our goals, it actually extends right into our relationships. Oversharing can be just as damaging to our connections with other people, especially the ones we care about the most. You know when you have an issue with your partner and the first thing you want to do is call your best friend to vent? Well, psychologists actually have a name for this. It's called emotional triangulation. You're basically creating a triangle where all the energy that should be going into solving the problem between 2 people gets diverted over to a third person. And here's exactly how that trap snaps shut. First, you vent, and your friend, who loves you, forms a negative opinion of your partner. But then, you and your partner work things out, you forgive and forget. The problem is, that negative bias doesn't just disappear from your friend's mind. You've now permanently tainted how they see your relationship. Now, this idea of creating a permanent bias doesn't just happen with venting. Oh no, it happens in a big way when we start talking about money. When you tell people about your financial situation, good or bad, you trigger a whole different kind of unconscious bias, the status perception bias. Just look at this. Once money gets thrown into the mix, our brains just can't help but start calculating status. Conversations can change in really subtle ways, and that genuine, authentic connection, it gets so much harder because now everything is being filtered through this lens of finances and jealousy and comparison. Okay, so we've talked about goals and we've talked about relationships. Now let's turn inward and see how this whole oversharing thing affects our own psychological well-being. It can feel so good to share our deepest insecurities, right? That quick release? Well, psychologists call that the cathartic illusion. It feels good for a second, but it doesn't actually heal anything. In fact, it's often the opposite. The more you talk about a weakness, the more you reinforce it in your own mind, making it a bigger, stronger part of your identity. This also applies to things like old family drama. There's some fascinating brain science here called memory reconsolidation. See, every time you bring up and retell a painful memory, you are literally reopening that psychological wound. And when your brain stores that memory again, it stores it with all that fresh pain, making that negative emotional loop even stronger. And think about this for a second. We all have emotional triggers, right? Those little things that just get under our skin. But when you tell people exactly what those triggers are, you're basically giving them a blueprint of your emotional vulnerabilities. You're handing them your remote control, and suddenly, Your peace depends entirely on how they decide to use it. So this brings us to our final and maybe our most important section. This is about reframing silence. It's not about hiding. It's a powerful, powerful act of self-respect. Let's talk about good deeds. When you do something kind and then immediately go tell everyone about it, you fall into something called the self-presentation trap. Your brain's motivation literally shifts from pure internal compassion to a need for external praise. The act becomes about getting credit, not about the kindness itself. The real reward is keeping that goodness entirely for yourself. And believe it or not, even pure joy is something that's worth protecting. When you share your greatest happiness too widely, you can trigger something called emotional misalignment. See, if someone else can't match your level of joy, it can actually make them feel uncomfortable, reminding them of something they might be lacking. And they might not even mean to, but their silent competition or resentment can just suck the energy right out of your happy moment. And really, it all just boils down to this one powerful idea. Silence is not weakness. It is not about being secretive. It's about recognizing that your thoughts, your goals, your peace, and your joy, they are valuable resources, and they deserve your protection. So what's the payoff here? Well, by practicing strategic silence, you reclaim your emotional power. You protect your own momentum. You learn to build validation from within yourself instead of always looking for it from the outside. And most importantly, you guard your peace in a world that is constantly trying to take it from you. So, as we wrap this up, I'm going to leave you with a question. Looking back at everything we've covered, your goals, your relationships, your inner world, which one of those areas in your life are you ready to give the gift of silence to? What will you choose to protect?